Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, the economic expletive on everyone's lips, recession. Guess what? We're officially in one. We'll look at what it means for you. Is more classroom disruption on the Term 3 timetable for secondary students. Their teachers in the ministry are back at the bargaining table, but some parents' patience is wearing thin. The PPTA is live. Police reveal an Opotiki mongrel mob boss died after being hit by a ute. The war on wallabies, the furry kind, is ramping up with a 50-kilometre containment fence. And is it time Auckland has paid more to park? And should electric cars get the top spots? You can watch us live on the RNZ website and Freeview, Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie ko Iwi Ashton tēnei. A Whakatane resident recorded what she thinks are gunshots as she was leaving a voicemail message on her phone. The police are investigating reports of shots being fired towards a vehicle in the town yesterday, a few hours after the nehu for mongrel mob Barbarians President Stephen Taiatini. Abby says the noise, recorded as she spoke, left her shaken.
Hubby's on night shift again tonight, so I'm going to have to get the kids down. Walk.
Abby says it left her with jangled nerves.
I definitely don't know what sort of category to put that into. It's just idiotic behaviour, really. But yeah, it was definitely a bit jumpy last night with any bangs going around the house.
Homicide detectives believe Mr. Taiatini was killed when he was run down by a ute on Friday in Opotiki. The Prime Minister is downplaying the recession, saying it's a consequence of this year's severe storms. The economy contracted for 2 quarters in a row, with gross domestic product falling by a seasonally adjusted 0.1% in the 3 months ended March. Chris Hipkins says the downturn was largely driven by the effects of Cyclone Gabrielle.
It's had a significant impact on our primary producing export industries, and that's reflected in the GDP numbers. The economists are also saying, though, that this is what they would describe as a technical recession, and that there isn't evidence that New Zealand's experiencing a deep or prolonged economic downturn.
When asked if the recession could lose Labour the election, Chris Hipkins said his party will campaign on a proud track record of managing the economy. The acting president of the PPTA says he understands parents' frustration with teachers' industrial action. The union's members are refusing to teach 2-year groups per day for 4 days a week until the end of June. Chris Abercrombie says teachers are exasperated as well.
Teachers are frustrated as well. It's no one's happy about this situation. It's not what we want. We want to make sure that we can meet a settlement. That's the whole point of this. Teachers are as frustrated as parents, as frustrated as students. No one's happy that we're in this situation. It's just unfortunately that's something we have to do at the moment.
Chris Abercrombie says he hopes bargaining with the Education Ministry tomorrow will lead to a settlement. Auckland's medical school says it's ready to go after the government announced it will fund 50 more students a year. University of Auckland Medical Faculty Deputy Dean Warwick Bagg says they don't know how the numbers will be split with Otago University, but they have the capacity for more immediately. He says he's thrilled that more students will have the opportunity to become doctors.
We have no shortage of excellent students applying to do medicine, and this has opened the door more for those students to study medicine and contribute to the country.
Police say a record-breaking shipment of methamphetamine hidden in maple syrup bottles from Canada would have amounted to almost a year's supply of the drug. They say they've broken a multi-million-dollar drug ring after finding 713 kilograms of meth, the biggest seizure of its kind at New Zealand's border. 6 men are facing charges. Detective Superintendent Greg Williams says the methamphetamine has a street value of roughly $250 million and would have produced around 35 million hits. And the Tertiary Education Union says job cuts will affect 90% of the national vocational education organisation Te Pukenga. The union says the institute, which combines polytechnics and most industry training organisations, has proposed axing about 400 roles. Daniel Benson-Giu from the Tertiary Education Union says many of the jobs are management roles.
One of the concerns our members will have is if they go, who's going to pick up their work, or how will that work be distributed? And our members are already facing extremely high workloads because Te Pukenga hasn't been replacing staff as they've left over the last year.
Daniel Benson-Giu says it could be several months before the cuts are confirmed. In sport, the Crusaders are anticipating plenty of niggles and a few verbal barbs when they play the Blues in tomorrow night's Super Rugby semi-final in Christchurch. The Crusaders were targeted by Dane Coles in their final regular season loss to the Hurricanes, with the All Blacks hooker getting under his opposite Cody Taylor's skin, provoking the visitors into giving away penalties. Crusaders captain Scott Barrett expects the Blues to take a leaf out of Coles' playbook.
Teams want to take you off your game and distract you and divert you from what's actually needed. So it was quite a timely lesson that I think heading into finals. The Blues are certainly going to show up with physicality, possibly niggle and possibly a bit of chat, so got to be prepared for that.
Meanwhile, Wallaby international Kurtley Beale has pleaded not guilty to 3 charges of sexual assault stemming from an incident at Bondi Beach last year. And in-form American golfer Brooks Koepka wants to be considered among the greats of the game. Koepka is chasing his 5th major title at the US Open, which tees off in Los Angeles tonight. But he's still some way off the likes of Jack Nicklaus at the top of the list with 18 major titles and Tiger Woods with 15.
Double digits, that's what I'm trying to get to. I don't think it's out of the question for me. I think the way I've prepared, the way I've kind of suited my game for these things is going to help me. And like I said, I'm only 33. So I've definitely got quite a bit of time. I just got to stay healthy and keep doing what I'm doing.
New Zealand's Ryan Fox is also in the fields. That's the news.
Tragedy in the Mediterranean.
He's under no doubt that 500 people were on board, which means at least 200 to 300 are missing, presumed dead.
Police out in force in Bay of Plenty.
We have zero tolerance for any sort of behaviour like this, and we let gangs know that too. They felt that overnight, don't get me wrong.
And Donald Trump continues his march towards the Republican nomination.
He says this is political persecution to thwart his efforts of reclaiming the White House in 2024.
In step with all the news, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland and Auckland, rain spreading south this evening and early tomorrow with heavy falls and squally thunderstorms possible until midday. Easing to showers over Northland tomorrow morning. Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Fine today. Cloud increasing and rain developing tomorrow, mainly north of Whakatane. Waikato to Taranaki, including Taumaru Nui and Taupo. Fine with frost tomorrow morning, scattered rain developing from tomorrow afternoon. From Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine today, rain spreading south from late tomorrow morning. Whanganui to Wellington, including Taihape, mainly fine. Frosty tomorrow morning. Fiordland and southern Westland, isolated showers today, cloudy with areas of rain tomorrow. And for the remaining South Island areas, mostly fine. Cloudy periods about Nelson and Marlborough and along the Canterbury and Otago coast. Valley fog lingering in central Otago with another frosty start tomorrow. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, often cloudy, light showers. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi, Evie. Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint te tēnei rā. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The dreaded R word has hit New Zealand. The latest stats out today confirm the country has entered a recession by a whisker, with negative growth in the last quarter of 2022 and the first 3 months of this year. Nationals raising the alarm, calling it a red light warning for an incredibly fragile economy. But the government says better times are ahead. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Pop open your cheapest bottle of bubbles. It's official. New Zealand's gone into recession.
Oh, no. Oh, not again.
I'm not surprised.
I was kind of just thought we were already wearing one.
Oh.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, it's not good. It's concerning.
Sorry, what's a recession?
What's a recession? It's a good question. The official definition is when an economy shrinks for 2 quarters in a row. In this case, New Zealand's economy contracted 0.7% over the 3 months to December, and then by 0.1% over the 3 months to March.
Although recession does sound scary and problematic for people, at the moment it's a relatively mild recession.
Gareth Kiernan is Chief Forecaster for the economic consultancy Infometrics and has been analysing the numbers. The slowdown is present through most parts of the economy and captures the double punch of the Auckland floods and Cyclone Gabrielle. It is clear the big spending boom of the COVID years is well and truly over.
So households really having to sort of adjust their spending in response to both higher interest rates, which are obviously sucking money out of budgets, but also higher inflation. That means that when you do go down to the shops, you're not getting as much bang for your buck there.
The Reserve Bank is in part responsible for the recession and won't be all that apologetic about it. It cranked up interest rates to try stop people spending and in turn curb the red-hot inflation.
It's very tough. Prices are ridiculous.
Things are a lot tighter. Property prices are falling, food's getting more expensive, things like that.
Everything just goes up and up. Skyrocketed, you know? Yes, I can arm and a leg now.
The tough times spell bad news for the Labour government, with the election fast approaching. If voters are struggling, they're more likely to choose change.
This is part of a global economic downturn. New Zealand's not immune from those things.
But will that prime ministerial defence ring true with voters? Chris Hipkins argues the economy's well placed to handle the storm, with low unemployment and strong wage growth, as well as rebounding exports, tourism and migration.
This is what they would describe as a technical recession.
It is not technical for New Zealanders to be struggling to pay for the groceries.
It may be a recession by the barest of margins, but it is a gift to the opposition. Nationals' Nicola Willis is sure to hammer Labour every chance she gets, right up to election day. And with polls predicting a razor-sharp election, the bleak backdrop is sure to fuel a bare-knuckle bruise-up.
This is the red light flashing.
It's just typical of what we see from the opposition. It's about bumper sticker slogans rather than any substance.
I feel like a dark cloud has started to hover over the country.
They seem to think that they can cut their way to prosperity.
We seem to have a tick in every bad box.
New Zealanders will get their chance to tick a box on October 14, just 4 months away. The country may or may not still be in recession then, but regardless, life's unlikely to feel much easier.
And that was our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, reporting there, 11 minutes after 5. Let us know your thoughts on that one. Are you feeling the recession? How so? 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Kia amo tonu mai, do stay with us. There's a growing tide of frustrated parents demanding an end to rolling teacher strikes that have seen thousands of high school students missing valuable class time. The Ministry of Education and the Post-Primary Teachers Association are back at the bargaining table, but after the last pay offer was rejected, industrial action ramped back up this week, with union members refusing to teach 2-year levels per day except on Fridays for the remainder of the term. Last night we brought you the story of a Hamilton parent who's launched a petition calling for an immediate halt to rolling strikes. Other parents have joined the chorus, concerned their children are collateral damage in the industrial dispute, having already missed days of education due to the COVID virus and flooding, and now this. For some, NCEA assessments are imminent, and others taking practical subjects say they haven't been able to complete coursework at home. So how long can this go on for? Joining us now is the PPTA's acting president, Chris Abercrombie. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora.
How close are you to a deal?
We're still at the bargaining table. Can't talk about that at the moment, but we're always hopeful. I'm always hopeful that we'll be able to reach a deal as soon as possible.
So how long could this industrial action go on for?
Well, teachers are really keen to get a settlement, so hopefully it doesn't take much longer, but the ball's fully in the government's court to make this stop.
So you have a meeting scheduled for Monday the 26th, a paid union meeting, and I see a message has gone out that this is to discuss further industrial action for Term 3 if you don't have a signed settlement by then. Is that so?
Yes, that's so.
So what might Term 3 industrial action look like?
It's far too early to say that because it's up to the members to decide what that action would be, so I can't comment on what that would look like.
Is it likely to be similar to what parents and students are experiencing now?
Again, unfortunately, I can't say what it would be because it has to be a vote by our membership. We're a member-led organisation, so whatever action's taken is supported by teachers.
But let me put it this way, Chris. You're not ruling out the prospect that there will be more rostered days off school for high school students in Term 3?
No, I'm not ruling that out. I'm not saying it's going to happen either, but I'm definitely not ruling it out.
I just want to read you some of the feedback we've had in since we've been doing stories and had our discussion with you last week also. This listener got in touch saying after 35 years teaching, they had resigned from the PPTA due to the PPTA's approach, saying that the organisation has no moral high ground on this. Bottom line, do not hurt kids' education. And this one, teachers are punishing the students. My child is a year 12, her school work is suffering. I am a nurse and I feel that if this was a nurses' strike, the children would not be suffering as much. And primary teachers have got in touch and say the secondary school teachers need to suck it up. Are you losing the room?
This is a really stressful time for everyone involved. Teachers would much prefer a settled environment so we can concentrate on teaching and learning. But this is unfortunately something that we have to do to be able to ensure the future of secondary education in Aotearoa New Zealand. But we fully understand the frustration that people are facing because we're dealing with that same frustration. Teachers don't want this to be happening any more than parents or students want this to be happening.
Why can't you negotiate in a different way without using this lever that brings kids into the process?
We would love to be able to negotiate in a different way about this, but unfortunately through very bitter experience, achieving meaningful improvement in secondary education has had to come through industrial action. We're not happy about that fact, but that's what's happened in the past, and unfortunately it seems to be what has to happen now.
How are students going to catch up work that they've missed and complete their NCEA requirements?
So schools will have a variety of ways of doing that. So that's a conversation to be having with individual teachers and schools to see the best way of doing that. But schools have done this in the past through other disruptions, and so I'm confident that will happen again this time.
In other disruptions, including COVID, students were offered extra NCEA credits. Do you think the Ministry of Education should be doing that for the students affected by your strike action?
I don't feel that's an appropriate use of those credits, but that would have to be a question for the ministry.
Right. So you're not concerned with what happens to the students?
We're absolutely concerned about what happens to the students. That's why we're taking this industrial action. At the moment, there's no guarantee there'll be a subject specialist teacher in front of that student. I regularly hear of schools, I heard of 2 the other day, that have no qualified science teachers teaching their junior science classes. That's unacceptable. Unfortunately, that's the reality in secondary schools. So while I agree this is a concern, what's more of a concern is not having that subject specialist teacher in front of them, and that's what we're fighting for.
I don't think there'd be any disagreement on that people want specialist teachers. The question is whether you are compounding the damage by using the rolling days off as a means to advance your pay claim.
Well, first of all, it's not just a pay claim, it's conditions as well. And there's other key conditions about creating time to support students through pastoral care, support our Māori teachers and their cultural competency, etc. So it's not just about pay. Pay is a big part. But what's more disruptive is not having any teacher in front of them. And in some schools, that's the reality. Some schools were rostering students home long before we engaged in industrial action on this issue because of a shortage of teachers. That's what we're fighting for. That's what we're stopping. And in the ministry own words, that's an issue. They've already talked about the issues of shortages in this area, and that's going from the ministry.
Chris, can you clear up, are teachers still being paid full pay if they are rostering involved in not teaching certain levels on certain days? Are they still getting full pay?
Yeah, so teachers continue to work during that time when they're not teaching certain year levels. They're still doing all the other work, marking, assessing, preparing work, planning, etc. So they continue to be paid. The action is a partial withdrawal of labour. It's not a full strike. So therefore, under the Employment Relations Act, that's a legal strike, and so teachers will still continue to be paid.
Right, so full pay. Are teachers generally giving students work on the days that they roster them off, coursework?
No, they shouldn't be giving them coursework. If there's work for them to finish that's already available, that's more than they should be doing that. But no, teachers should not be giving specific special work for them to be working on in those times off.
Okay, so rostering the students off, not giving them extra work to do at home so that they can keep up with their course requirements but still getting full pay.
Those students can absolutely continue to carry on with work that is set for them, but no special work was set. But teachers are absolutely carrying on with all the other work expected of them in that time. So this is a partial strike under the Employment Relations Act. So that's why teachers will continue to be paid, because they're completing all the other work set.
Chris, do you know how many of your members have sought exemptions to continue teaching some subjects, including practical subjects?
No, I don't have that information to hand. That's dealt with by the regions. Each region has their own exemption process.
Appreciate your time. That is the PPTA's acting president, Chris Abercrombie. Do get in touch with your thoughts, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Police say Bay of Plenty mongrel mob boss Stephen Taiatini died after being hit by a ute. Investigators believe a Holden, Colorado four-wheel drive found gutted by fire on the outskirts of town at the weekend was the vehicle involved. Hundreds of gang members attended the 45-year-old's Nehu in Whakatane yesterday, with police maintaining a large presence in the area today. Finn Blackwell reports.
Hubby's on night shift again tonight, so I'm going to have to get the kids down. Walk.
Whakatane resident Abby was leaving a voice note on her phone when gunshots rang out near a retail park to the north of town yesterday.
I heard a loud bang, thought it was a vehicle backfiring. Then subsequently there was another one, realised it was gunshots coming out of the window of a vehicle on the roundabout. So I ran for the dealership, ran inside, and there was about 5 or 6 shots total. It's a little bit surreal that anything actually happened. I definitely don't know what sort of category to put that into. It's just idiotic behaviour, really.
Abby says some folks are still on high alert, despite Stephen Taiatini's funeral being over and the gang presence starting to diminish.
There's definitely some caution being taken. For example, my daughter's rugby game has just been cancelled on Saturday because of it. So there's, public gatherings and things like that are being taken cautiously.
In nearby Opotiki, locals were today out enjoying the sun at cafes and going about their usual activities. Patched members of the mongrel mob gang from various parts of the country could also be spotted, filling their cars at the petrol station and shopping at the local Foursquare. A large number were gathered outside the Taiatini household, but around town, most residents spoken to by RNZ weren't worried.
No, it hasn't been that tense. I don't think it's been pretty quiet. Not many people coming into town, shops being closed obviously. In terms of the gangs, they've been pretty courteous. We've had no drama here at the shop or anything like that.
No problems whatsoever, actually. Quite safe, to be quite honest. A lot of police presence, but even the gangs themselves have been very well behaved and they haven't been roaming around town. They've been doing their own thing.
Some residents told RNZ the gangs have been getting more rowdy over the past few months. Others didn't want to speak to media for fear of being identified. The disruption caused by Stephen Taiatini's funeral has become a political hot potato, with both the government and opposition decrying the gang's behaviour.
I think gang activity contributes nothing to New Zealand society, and in fact it detracts from it and takes away from it.
And now we're in a position where our schools are closed, bus services aren't running, and 2 houses have been firebombed. And the Prime Minister this morning says it's actually not his job. Well, I have to say, Prime Minister, it is your job to actually make sure...
But Te Pāti Māori co-leader Rawiri Waititi today hit out at the Prime Minister and National Party leader for their recent comments and called on the media to do better.
Christopher Luxon, Chris Hipkins, need to shut their mouths and stop using our iwi as a political football to score points. They have no business whatsoever commenting on matters they know nothing about. Keep my iwi out of your mouth.
Police last night seized 3 firearms, 6 offensive weapons and ammunition after responding to reports of unlawful gang behaviour in Opotiki. 2 people were arrested. Eastern Bay of Plenty Area Commander, Acting Inspector Tristan Murray, says police will continue to keep a visible presence in the area over the coming days.
It is 22 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. And homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Do get in touch if you want to let us know your thoughts on the recession. Officially, we're in recession. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The other thing we're getting a lot of feedback on is the teachers' industrial action. You can join that conversation as well. Same numbers. It is time for us to go to the headlines now. Ko ewe anō tēnei.
The country's in a recession after the economy contracted for 2 quarters in a row. The government says it's a technical recession by the barest of margins and largely driven by the effects of Cyclone Gabrielle. But National's Nicola Willis says New Zealand's now doing worse than comparable countries. The Post-Primary Teachers Association acting president, Chris Abercrombie, has told Checkpoint he hopes they'll be able to reach a pay deal with the Education Ministry as soon as possible, but isn't ruling out Term 3 strikes. The union's members are refusing to teach 2 year groups per day for 4 days a week until the end of June, and parents are becoming increasingly frustrated. Police investigating the death of Bay of Plenty mongrel mob boss Stephen Taiatini in Opotiki last Friday night say the 45-year-old died after being hit by a ute. They believe the vehicle was a Holden, Colorado four-wheel drive, later found burnt out. Police are keeping a large presence in the area after Mr Taiatini's nehu in Whakatane yesterday. The national training organisation, Te Pukenga, has proposed cutting about 950 jobs. It says it will create 550 new roles with a net loss of 404 full-time equivalent staff. The institute combines polytechnics and industry training organisations and has 10,000 staff. And a public memorial is about to begin in Wellington's Cathedral of St Paul for those affected by last month's fatal Loafers Lodge hostel fire. 5 people died in the blaze on May 16th, and a man has been charged with the murder. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic now in Wellington, there will be lane closures tonight at Ngauranga Gorge, State Highway 1 between 7pm and 5:30 in the morning. That's for barrier replacement works. Our next traffic news and headlines is at about 20 to 6.
Kia ora e ho. A proposal to revamp the Rugby Championship to accommodate South Africa and Argentina has been rejected by SANZAAR. Rugby Australia chairman Hamish McLennan claims any changes to the championship depends on New Zealand's willingness to compromise. Well, joining me now is sports reporter Jonty Dine. So, Jonty, does that mean the status quo remains?
Kia ora, yeah, that's right. There'll be no significant changes to the format for the next few years at least. Now, it was, as you mentioned, South Africa and Argentina really pushing for this change. It was to give their players in Europe more of an opportunity to have a sufficient rest, and This, of course, would have affected New Zealand's Super Rugby and NPC seasons. So McLennan says Rugby Australia supported the changes in order to keep South Africa and Argentina in the competition, which isn't exactly an unheralded fear because, of course, we've already seen South Africa walk away from the Super Rugby competition. So he believes it's for the greater good of the rugby ecosystem, if you will. However, SANZAAR have actually come out to clear up any confusion, saying the format will not be reviewed until after 2026. Now, Mark Robinson, New Zealand Rugby CEO, he's come out and said New Zealand are open to changes, whether that be an expansion, including sides like Japan and Fiji, and those talks are already underway.
Let's move on to the Black Caps. So yet more players off to play overseas.
That's right, yes. 6 Black Caps have signed on to play in the inaugural T20 League in the United States. So that's Trent Boult, he'll play in New York for the Mumbai Indians, Glenn Phillips and Adam Milne for the Washington Freedom, Martin Guptill, Lockie Ferguson, they'll be at the Los Angeles Knight Riders, and Corey Anderson, who was already based in the United States full-time, he'll be joining the San Francisco Unicorns. So,
love the names, Jonty.
Great name. So, at this stage, there are no direct clashes with any internationals, which is a good thing, but of course, we've already seen the impact that these flexi contracts can have. We saw Trent Boult having to sit out the Test Series against England in February to prepare for the IPL. And now former Black Caps coaches Mike Hesson and Craig McMillan, they've both been pretty scathing of these flexi contracts. They told Sky Sports No Boundaries that players need to be making sacrifices in order to play for their country.
Maybe I'm old school, and Hess will probably tell you I am, but playing for your country still has to be your priorities. But I have an issue when players are coming back and if they're trying to pick and choose when they play for New Zealand, that doesn't sit overly well with me.
If you want the IPL and you want 2 or 3 or 4 other tournaments as well, you probably can't have everything. And I just think the flexi contracts just make it a bit untidy.
So as you heard, the criticism sort of aimed at players wanting to play in multiple leagues around the world without it affecting their eligibility to play for New Zealand. Both Hesson and McMillan agree that the IPL does offer enough of a financial boost for these players, and it's a big window of the season that they're over in India playing, and to want to do that and also play in, for example, the Australian League, the Pakistan Caribbean League, they both agree that's just going to really muddy the waters, and also it's going to be quite disheartening for those players who stay in New Zealand and play here all year round.
Thank you, Jonty. That is Jonty Dine, sports reporter there. Muriwai residents are airing their concerns to Auckland Minister Michael Wood tonight. The minister's travelled to the area hard hit in Cyclone Gabrielle, where many people are still not able to live in their homes. And our reporter Tom Taylor is there, who joins us live. Tom, what have the residents been saying to the minister?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, the meeting's just wrapping up for tonight. There's a food truck behind me where residents are grabbing a much-needed feed after the intensity at times that this meeting provided. So it wasn't just the Minister for Auckland, Michael Wood, there tonight. There was also the council, and so a lot of questions were directed at the council. Minister Wood actually arrived 45 minutes, much to the consternation of a lot of those gathered, but quickly got into a few more of the details. So what people had to raise here, they were interested in the government's role in collaboration with the council here. So some of them are interested in the question of when the government might step in if it becomes apparent that the council's just not up for the job. The government stepping in to corral, in effect, the council there. Minister Wood responded to that kind of a question, though, hammering home his points that this process needs to be locally led, which became an important factor in the recovery from the Christchurch earthquakes, that process needing to have a local kind of approach to it. We did learn tonight that the council, Auckland Council, has been invited to negotiations tomorrow on the buyout process. So they've been invited to the negotiating table with Treasury from tomorrow. And that's a process that both council and the minister said tonight that they really want that wrapped up in a matter of weeks. But that's not preventing locals like Caroline Bell Booth, who's just saying that she's not impressed with how the council's handled things to date, and for her, things can't go quickly enough.
Look, we understand that it's a challenging situation, for sure, and we've tried to be as patient as we can, for as long as we can. However, it's very hard to deduce from the perspective of essentially the victims. It's hard to deduce whether the council is being malicious in its negligence or whether it's just overwhelmed and unable to sort of function on a practical level.
What does it mean for you? Like, how close are you to, needing to get some assistance on your mortgage payments and that kind of thing?
Well, our private resources will run out in August. At that point, the expectation will be to maintain our obligations to the bank whilst paying for temporary accommodation costs at market rate.
And Tom, the cordon around Muriwai lifts tomorrow, is that right?
That's right, yeah, and it's a point that a lot of residents here were quite unhappy about. So there was actually a survey done at the start of last week. The cordon was at one point going to be lifted on Friday, the 6th of June, I think that is. Now it's being lifted tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. So in the survey of more than 400 residents, 72% of them were not in favour of opening up the cordon at this point in time. Some of the reasons are around just the safety aspect. There's one thin road going down into Muriwai at the moment, and residents are concerned about what happens if people take that at speed, as residents say they often do, or just people kind of rubbernecking, looking at all the damage that has gone on here. They don't want people coming into the town and kind of setting up and potentially looting houses. That's a really major concern for them, with so many houses here still red stickered. People don't have neighbours that can just check on their properties as would happen in a regular neighbourhood. So they are concerned about that potential for crime. There's also water issues down here. The council's still providing water through a number of tankers down here. So they're concerned about what are visitors going to be able to rely on, concerned about the toilets down here and their water supply, and also actually the water in the sea, which they say is contaminated at the moment from silt runoff from these major slips. So any visitors might really want to check that water before they dive in if they're keen for a midwinter swim there. But some residents like Kirk McKelvey, they're just saying that tomorrow it's really not the time to be opening just yet.
My kind of personal feelings are it's a mistake at the moment. I think there's a number of reasons why. Firstly, I don't think the small Waitea Road is able to cope with the volume of traffic that will arrive after the cordon comes down. The road was never really designed for that sort of potential. I think also too, by opening the park for the general public, is going to overwhelm the infrastructure, which is broken at the moment. We don't have an adequate water supply for the toilets. We have open sewerage in the park. We have polluted sea.
Thank you for the update there, Tom. That is Tom Taylor, who's joined us live there from the Muriwai residents meeting with the Auckland Minister, Michael Wood. It is 26 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me in the studio. Busy day for the business team. The economy has dipped into recession at the start of the year. What is the reason, Nona?
Well, the economy is shrinking. That's what it's come down to. And it's the second quarter in a row. So the Reserve Bank of New Zealand was forecasting contraction to occur in the June and September quarter. It started earlier than was expected. We saw that in December. We had a contraction there. It was revised to a 0.7% contraction in the December quarter. We've had the March quarter now. That's a 0.1% contraction. Some people would say that's a shallow recession, but when you think about a forecast for contraction in the June quarter, in the September quarter, and zero growth in the December quarter, you can call it shallow all you like, but it's going to be a long time before the end of the year. And in the meantime, people are going to be spending less. The economy will shrink. And as it shrinks, you're going to start seeing some of the fallout. And that's been forecast by the Reserve Bank. We're going to see unemployment rise. Interest rates are going to stay high for a while longer. And some economists are forecasting that the contraction could occur right to the end of the year and into next year. If you looked at the Reserve Bank forecasts, you would think from that things will start turning around in a real way, probably by 2025. Yeah, and you're looking, but it's true. I mean, you could just look at the forecasts and, growth is forecast in the March quarter of 2024 of 0.2%. That's not massive. That's not a big number. And really, things don't sort of seem to return to, inflation in the midpoint of the Reserve Bank's range, according to them, is someplace in the, it would be 2.3% inflation in the March quarter of 2025. At the time, we're going to see interest rates, the official cash rate at 5% and unemployment at 5.4%. Those aren't brilliant numbers. People should be concerned by these numbers, and they shouldn't be, it's just technical. This is like a recession. It's a recession, all right? It's not a maybe. Stop. It's a recession. So what does that mean? You need to consider that the economy is going to shrink. For businesses, it means less investment. A lot of that has to do with the higher interest rates. Some of the reasons that we saw what kind of things contracted, it was services, exports, and agriculture. There was a bit of a rise in construction, but we know that that's also slowing down. The housing market, though, there's some good news there, possibly. But overall, I don't think we should be cheering on this recession. People who are concerned about recession should be.
Let's talk about the housing market. So signs it's beginning to turn, and I think by that you mean in the upward direction?
Yes, so there's a bit of positive news here, offsetting everything.
Depends on what side of the fence you sit on.
Well, there's many of the sellers are still sitting on the fence. They're waiting for things to improve, and there's no doubt about that. However, there's more buyers in the market, and that's an improvement. We're seeing a lot more activity in terms of open homes and so on, so that's an encouraging sign. And considering it is the winter, normally this is when we see people shy away from making moves. That's not happening. That's a positive. And so overall, we saw sales increase quite dramatically. Let me see. I've got the numbers here somewhere. So we saw sales improve, the volume of sales improve across, I think, 7 regions. Pretty positive. Not everywhere is seeing this improvement. But look, any improvement we see in the economy is a good sign. At this time, it's good if there are some positive signs, and people should be careful, to save their money and make sure that they have set aside something for the rainy day.
Let's do a quick spin around the markets, please, Nona.
Okay, so we had, like I say, a pretty tough day on the markets. We rose 9 points in the NZX Top 50 to 11,687. And that's sort of probably a good tone because the U.S. Federal Reserve did not raise their official cash rate, the equivalent of, which was great. So they held rates unchanged. And, okay, they've signaled that they may have to increase again in the future. But for now, the New Zealand dollar, it did drop after those GDP numbers came out. So 61.8 US cents, 90.8 Australian, and we're steady at 48.9 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with Business News. And as we've been reporting, New Zealand's tipped into a recession. The government says the economy's taken a knock from the Auckland floods and Cyclone Gabrielle, while the opposition says the red lights are flashing for the New Zealand economy. Well, joining us now is Kiwi Bank Chief Economist Jared Kerr. Kia ora, Jared.
Good evening.
Is this brace position territory? Is it a red light flashing?
I think it is a red light flashing. I think the economy has shown to be weaker than we were expecting. It started contracting sooner than most people thought, and it's a little deeper than we thought. But it's all about the outlook, and the outlook is still uninspiring. We think that we're going to see further contractions this year, and it's all on the back of a rather aggressive monetary policy stance.
Okay, lots to unpack there. Let's start with the uninspiring nature of what's coming down the pipe. How bad is it going to be and how long for?
We think we're going to see a couple of contractions later this year. So the second half of this year, I think, is going to be worse than the first half. And then I think we'll see things steady up and improve, hopefully, over 2024. But that will require the Reserve Bank cutting interest rates from early next year.
So, Jared, you're anticipating we could be in recession for what amounts to a year?
Yes. I think we've recorded 2 quarters already, and that's just the start of the year, and we're likely to see another at least 2 quarterly contractions this year. So it is a long, shallow recession, but it is going to cause a lift in unemployment.
All right. So in terms of the Reserve Bank, how does this, the position we find ourselves in, reflect on the decisions made by the Reserve Bank and the Governor, Adrian Orr?
Well, I think we've seen a rather heavy-handed, aggressive approach from the Reserve Bank. They were one of the first in the world to start lifting rates, so congratulations there, but I think they've gone too far. We warned of this late last year. We saw the internal data within Kiwi Bank shifting quite quickly. And I think we may find that the last couple of rate hikes from the Reserve Bank weren't needed. And that just means that they can turn around, I think, a bit sooner than most people, themselves included, expect.
So what happened with all the talk around the budget that we may bypass a recession? What went wrong?
Well, Treasury revised their forecast higher. You'll note that most economists and the Reserve Bank of New Zealand didn't. We still have recessions in our numbers, but even Treasury's forecasts, even though they were revised higher and they said we're not going to see a recession, they were forecasting very ordinary outcomes this year. So it looks like they're a little optimistic, and we're seeing that in government revenues. So the tax take that the government's getting is much lower than their forecasts, and that's coming through in weaker GST, which is a sign of soft activity, and it's also weaker corporate tax. So businesses are saying, hey, we thought we were going to earn $1 million this year, we're only earning 900. We're paying less tax than we thought, and that is a very clear sign of a softening economy.
So, Jared, you touched on this when you mentioned unemployment, but can you please spell it out? How does a recession and this kind of recession, how is that going to translate in terms of people's everyday lives?
I've been talking to businesses ever since joining Kiwi Bank, and the discussion that we had this time last year was that they were struggling to find workers. They were screaming out for workers. The discussion today has changed. and it's more around actually reducing their workforce. They're worried about their revenue, they're worried about the amount of inventory they're carrying, they're worried about the demand for their product or service. That's a big change in 9 months. So we're actually going to start seeing businesses, laying off people. It's not going to be mass layoffs. We're not going to see a massive lift in unemployment, but we are going to see a lift in unemployment.
Really appreciate your time, Jared. Thanks for joining us. That's Jared Kerr, who's the Kiwi Bank Chief Economist. It is 17 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program tonight. 2101 on text. Don't forget you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. And there's the email address, which is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines. Anea Iwi, mina pitipiti kōrero.
The Prime Minister says he isn't using the high gang presence in the Bay of Plenty to score political points. Chris Hipkins was responding to criticism of both Labour and National by Te Pāti Māori co-leader Rawiri Waititi. Hundreds of patched members are in the area to mourn the death of mongrel mob Barbarians President Stephen Taiatini. Police believe he was run down by a ute in Opotiki on Friday. Meanwhile, the manager of an Opotiki Foursquare says it's been a quiet week with shops and schools closing amid the gang presence, but the manager, who didn't want to be named, said the gang members had been well behaved. The chair of the Migrant Action Trust charity, Camille Nakid, says more needs to be done to help migrant workers at risk of exploitation. RNZ has reported on dozens of Chinese migrant workers being left jobless and destitute after paying thousands of dollars for work visas. Camille Nakid says the scale of the problem is being underreported. A law change allowing New Zealand citizens to change their registered sex on their birth certificate takes effect from today. It means instead of going through the family court or providing proof of medical treatment, individuals can apply to the Registrar General directly. And the former manager of the morgue at Harvard Medical School in the United States is among 5 people to have been charged in connection with the theft and sale of human remains. Prosecutors said Cedric Lodge stole heads, brains and other body parts. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic. In about an hour and 15 minutes, there'll be lane closures on Ngaudanga Gorge in Wellington for barrier replacement works. That's from 7 tonight until 5:30 in the morning. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Evie. Hundreds of people are gathering at Wellington's Cathedral of St Paul for a service of remembrance for the victims of the Loafers Lodge fire. 5 people died and nearly 100 others lost their shelter in the blaze that tore through the multi-storey budget accommodation. Our reporter Bill Hickman joins us now from there. Kia ora, Bill. What is the turnout like?
Oh, well, I think it's safe to say that the cathedral is filled up right to the back seats. There's plenty of members of the Newtown community, representatives of fire and emergency, the police, Wellington City Mission, a lot of people here to acknowledge the loss of life and the people who have lost their homes in this event.
Tell us a bit about the service and who's organised it.
Well, this has been organised by the Cathedral, by the Wellington City Mission, and of course by the Office of the Mayor. I think it's really indicative of how involved the whole Wellington community has been in supporting the people who were a part of this tragedy, and the turnout reflects that.
And what have people been saying to you?
The people that I've been talking to, I think, are still in a state of shock that such a terrible event could be a part of their community. I've heard a lot of concern about the building standards and the vulnerable people that were housed in this building, and a lot of determination to make improvements to address the standards that led to this tragedy so that it doesn't happen again. I think the community and Wellington as a whole is quite proud of how they've come together in support of the people who are housed in Loafers Lodge. And that is something for them to all feel very proud of. There's been a lot of money raised. There's a lot of concern and deep feeling about what's gone on a month ago.
Thank you, Bill. Good to talk to you. That is Bill Hickman, who is outside Wellington's Cathedral of St Paul, where a special service of remembrance is being held for the victims of the Loafers Lodge fire. It is 12 minutes away from 6. Ki amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. One of Australia's tourism hotspots, Byron Bay, is aiming to have a strict cap on short-term rentals by this time next year to help fix severe housing shortages. Other councils are watching with interest as many grapple with how to get properties off platforms like Airbnb and back onto the local residential market. Experts warn Australia is far behind other countries when it comes to this kind of regulation. In New Zealand, for example, Christchurch requires resource consent for all short-term accommodation providers. The ABC's Eleanor Whitehead reports.
When Helen, from the Northern Rivers region in New South Wales, separated from her husband, she struggled to find an affordable rental.
All of the places that people live have been turned into Airbnb. Anything that is available is outrageously priced because they can ask what they want.
Her cleaning business also struggles to find staff because there's nowhere for them to live.
People need so much more money, they can't afford to live here, so then the businesses that are here can't get staff, so then it just goes on. And I can't understand how our government has allowed it to just fester like this.
The Byron Shire Council is trying to impose a 60-day cap on holiday rentals, a plan opposed by the accommodation industry, which says they're vital to the region's billion-dollar tourism business. Mayor Michael Lyon sees it differently.
We are probably one of the most expensive places in the state. We have the highest rate of homelessness. There's more homeless people in sheer numbers now than the city of Sydney. We don't want to wipe out the industry, but we need to break the investment model so we don't have people coming in, buying up properties, kicking out long-term tenants and turning them into short stays.
However, regulating the sector hasn't been easy, with tussles between the state government and council over who has the power to exercise the restrictions. Michael Lyon says those issues still haven't been completely resolved, but he hopes to have the cap enforced within a year, setting a precedent for other New South Wales councils.
We're happy to do the heavy lifting because getting a really good, strong framework in place will light the way for at least 10 or 15 other council areas that are suffering this exact same problem.
Nicole Gurran, who's a professor of urban and regional planning at the University of Sydney, says the Byron case highlights the difficulties of regulating holiday lets in Australia.
Australia is very much behind the eight ball when it comes to making sure that we protect our residential housing stock. Cities like London, New York, San Francisco have been regulating the short-term rental sector to prevent that loss of long-term rentals to holiday homes for over a decade.
She says a mix of state and local planning laws in Australia complicates efforts to do the same.
The situation that we need to move to is empowering local councils to respond to issues in their local areas. And the 60-night cap is a good way to do that, as well as potentially other types of regulations such as differential taxes, which is being proposed by some local governments, as well as a more robust permit scheme.
All right, let's get to some of your feedback now. A real flood in on the rolling industrial action from secondary teachers, and it's a mixed bag. This person says Chris from the PPTA, the acting president, has run out of road with parents. He is now burning bridges with the parent community. That from John, who is a parent of a Year 9 student. Another listener says, I am a PPTA member. Absolutely, the industrial action is tough on everybody. In the 20 years I have been teaching, this is the longest industrial action we have taken. We all want to get back to normal teaching times. We also want to attract teaching staff. Teaching is a tough job. It is socially intense and a big responsibility. Don't forget, in the 70s, teachers were paid the same rate as MPs. Dave's got in touch to say, for the parents complaining about strikes, are they the same parents that take their kids out of school for a midterm holiday? Oh, that's their decision to disrupt their kids' education. And this one from Jackie in Wellington, teachers are on full pay during this process. How is that fair? Perhaps if their pay was impacted, they wouldn't be striking and hurting our children's education. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ if you'd like to join that conversation. The war on wallabies is ramping up with an almost 50-kilometre exclusion fence going up in South Canterbury. They may look furry and cute, but these Aussie visitors are destructive pests that have been spreading outside the current containment zone. So the goal is to lock them down and protect the Mackenzie Basin from a full-scale invasion. Wallaby Program Leader Brent Glentworth joins me now. Hi, Brent.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I'm very well. Tell me about this fence, please.
Yeah, so as your introduction just said, it's part of our containment area in Canterbury for our Wallaby containment area. Most of that containment area, which runs from the Waitaki River up through the Waitaki Aviemore Lake system, up Benmore, up the Tekapo River, up Lake Tekapo, Macaulay River, over the Two Thumb Range and down the Rangitata, has really secure geographic boundaries, mainly those rivers and high alpine ridgelines. But that section, 48 kilometres from Lake Tekapo down to the top of Lake Benmore, which is adjacent to the Tekapo River, is less secure, and that's why this fence is required.
These guys are tricky little suckers, aren't they? So what kind of fencing is it?
Yeah, it's contrary to what most people think. Bennett's wallaby, the wallaby we have in South Canterbury, they don't really jump stock fences. They're a Tasmanian wallaby, and this fence is only 1.3 metres high. It's made from wallaby exclusion netting, which is produced in Australia. They've developed it for excluding wallabies. So
Brent, is that to stop them squeezing through the wire?
Yeah, well, it is. It's got a number of horizontal and vertical wires, just like a normal netting fence, but it's also got a 300mm apron, Lisa, that folds down against the ground and is screwed into the ground with terrapins. So Bennett's would normally try and passively move along a fence, looking for a depression to get underneath or try and slide through between the wires. They really jump a fence of 1.3 metres high anyway.
So how long is it going to take to put this up, and what will the cost be?
So we're hoping that it would be finished in around 3 years, doing it in incremental stages. This is part of the Tipamatoro National Wallaby Eradication Program, which is funded through New Zealand Biosecurity. So we hope to install it in instalments, and this year we're looking at 15 kilometres. We hope to start shortly, and we hope to finish that first 15 kilometres in early July.
How many of these things do you think are wobbling around down there?
Well, that containment area, as I mentioned previously, there's thousands of wallaby, if not millions of wallaby, actually, inside that containment area. They've gradually increased over the last 30 years, and they've put pressure on that containment border, and they've spread through to the Western Mackenzie, through up to Te Manahuni-Araki, another management unit, and also the south bank of the Waitaki. So since the Wallaby Board was disbanded in 92, we've had around 2,500 wallaby reports outside of that dedicated containment area. But of those, we've managed to catch up with 1,759 at present.
So, Brent, what is the fear for the Mackenzie Basin if they do sort of swarm their way in?
Well, they're just another herbivore threat to both production farming and to biosecurity. 3 wallaby equate to a stock unit in terms of dry matter consumption. And so anything stock
Brent, you mean 3 wallabies eat as much as a cow, or?
No, a stock unit's a ewe equivalent, so 1 sheep.
Okay.
Yep. And so there's a dietary overlap with all stock. They do hit all plant green feed that's out for cattle and stuff like that as well. But in terms of threats to biodiversity, any regenerating native bush seedling that is in wallaby reach, Pursuta panax, some broadleaf, even some of the mountain herbs that they'll take and change that species composition.
We're almost out of time, but I'm curious. I know that the likes of Kaimanawa horses, they're using, in essence, birth control to get the population down. Can you use anything like that for the wallaby?
No, I'm afraid we can't. There has been trials before with another marsupial in New Zealand, Australian, possum, where they tried immunocontraception or contraceptives, but you need to bait those animals repeatedly with the contraceptive. So it's not really applicable. In that containment area where we have huge populations, it's a vast area, 900,000 hectares. It's 14 times larger than the surface of Lake Taupo.
Really appreciate your time, Brent. That's Brent Glentworth, who's the Wallaby program leader there. They're going to eventually have a 50-kilometre fence there to keep those little furry suckers contained. The fear is that they'll get more of them into the Mackenzie Basin and do damage. Big eaters, he was saying. Let's get to some more of your feedback now. Sticking with the teachers' rolling strike action. This person says, as a parent, I totally support the teachers as I believe they are thoroughly underpaid. Flip side of the coin, secondary teachers need to get back to work and stop negatively affecting our kids who need to learn. And more on this, what if teachers take less holidays and work more days and make more money? They could do more class prep and reporting during that time that they are usually on holidays and free up some term time. I see teachers leaving school at 3:30, and what if they were paid to work until 5, get similar hours and holidays to the rest of the majority of the full-time workforce? Another says, imagine if the media focused the tough questions on the government and not the teachers. I taught for 15 years and burnt out. I miss it, but I hear your framing of teachers and realise we'll never be truly valued, says that person. On the recession, Maureen's got in touch to say recession or no recession, with a finance minister like Nicola Willis, i.e. a national government, Kiwis would be much worse off, apart from highly paid CEOs. She has said that they will be reining in government spending.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Ngā mihi o te pō, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Secondary Teachers Union isn't ruling out more rolling strikes next term, with members meeting later this month to decide on further industrial action. Thousands of students are missing class each day for the rest of this term, which ends on June 30th, and some parents are growing increasingly frustrated. The PPTA's acting president, Chris Abercrombie, has told Checkpoint it's up to members to decide if they want to continue the strikes into the third term.
This is a really stressful time for everyone involved. Teachers would much prefer a settled environment so we can concentrate on teaching and learning. But this is unfortunately something that we have to do to be able to ensure the future of secondary education in Aotearoa New Zealand. But we fully understand the frustration that people are facing because we're dealing with that same frustration.
Chris Abercrombie says the government should make a pay offer that teachers can accept. The union and the Education Ministry are back in talks tomorrow. Life support has been turned off for one of the 2 boys who were buried when a sand dune collapsed on Great Barrier Island at the weekend. The boys were digging tunnels during a family picnic at Midlands Beach on Sunday when the sand caved in. The father of Levi Sonchai Galaboski, Logan, has released a statement to Kaitoke School saying the decision to end life support was made with a heavy heart. He says Levi's body will be taken back home to the island tomorrow. The school will be closed on Friday for the school community to grieve, as well as next Tuesday when a service for Levi is being held. A woman who says she heard gunshots and tyres squealing in Whakatane yesterday says it was nerve-jangling. The police are investigating after reports of shots being fired towards a vehicle in the town a few hours after the nehu for Mongrel Mob Barbarians President Stephen Taietini. Hundreds of patched members attended the 45-year-old's service. Abby was at work in Whakatane at the time.
I heard a loud bang, thought it was a vehicle backfiring. Then subsequently there was another one, realised it was gunshots coming out of the window of a vehicle on the roundabout. So I ran for the dealership, ran inside, and there was about 5 or 6 shots total.
The police believe Mr Taietini was killed when he was run down by a ute last week. The Council of Trade Unions is warning people not to overinterpret today's figures, showing New Zealand has tipped into a recession. The economy contracted for 2 consecutive quarters, with gross domestic product falling by a seasonally adjusted 0.1% in the 3 months ended March. CTU economist Craig Rennie says talk of recession will naturally worry people, but the figures aren't that bad. He says the latest figures show the government's playing its part by spending less money in an inflationary environment. The opposition, however, says government mismanagement is to blame. Police say a record-breaking shipment of methamphetamine hidden in maple syrup bottles from Canada would have amounted to almost a year's supply of the drug. They say they've broken a multi-million-dollar drug ring as a result of finding 713 kilograms of meth in January and the biggest seizure of its kind at New Zealand's border. 6 men are facing charges. Detective Superintendent Greg Williams says the drug bust has prevented a huge amount of social harm.
This would have netted around about $250 million in profit for this transnational crime group, is over 35 million doses. So it's huge. It's almost a year's supply of methamphetamine based on wastewater data from January this year.
Greg Williams says New Zealand is a target for international drug syndicates because they can make huge profits. The Tertiary Education Union says job losses will affect nearly all parts of the National Vocational Education Organisation, Te Pūkenga. The institute announced the cuts and a new operating model today. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The institute refused to provide details until it's briefed all 10,000 of its staff. However, RNZ understands Te Pūkenga has proposed cutting 960 jobs, with about half redeployed to new roles and losses in nearly every part of the organisation. The Tertiary Education Union says the institute has also provided long-awaited details of how it will bring together polytechnic and workplace training. Staff will be organised in regional rather than local organisations, but also nationally according to their fields of study. Te Pūkenga has been under fire over large deficits and delays in finalising its operating model.
A charity says community services should be better funded to help migrant workers settle in New Zealand. RNZ has reported on dozens of Chinese migrant workers being left jobless and destitute after paying thousands of dollars for work visas. The chairperson of the Migrant Action Trust, Camille Nakid, says the fact that migrant workers can be dismissed so easily means that they're not seen as equals. She says the government needs to do more.
We have community services. What we need is to resource them, give them funding, provide them with the people, the money, the time to do it, and resource them properly. Don't just give them minimal pay for doing work that some other organisation will be paid a lot.
Camille Nakid also says the scale of migrant worker exploitation is being underreported. And hundreds of people are gathering at Wellington's Cathedral of St Paul at a service of remembrance for the victims of the Loafers Lodge fire. 5 people died and nearly 100 others lost their shelter in the blaze that tore through the multi-storey budget accommodation a month ago. A 48-year-old man charged with 5 counts of murder and 2 of arson is due in court next week. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, Dr Joan Donovan, leading researcher in online extremism, media manipulation and disinformation campaigns. Why is a banned energy drink with nearly twice the legal limit of caffeine still for sale on Facebook Marketplace? US adventurers Brad Ryan and his 92-year-old grandma, who've now visited all the national parks in the US. And Richard Poynton spent 40 years travelling the world collecting Persian and Oriental handmade carpets. A new exhibition celebrates that collection. With me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland and Auckland, rain spreading south this evening and early tomorrow with heavy falls and squally thunderstorms possible until midday, easing to showers over Northland tomorrow morning. Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty, fine today. Cloud increasing and rain developing tomorrow, mainly north of Whakatane. Waikato to Taranaki, including Taumaru Nui and Taupo, fine with frosts tomorrow morning. Scattered rain developing from tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne to Waded Upper, fine today. Rain spreading south from late tomorrow morning. Whanganui to Wellington, including Taihape, mainly fine. Frosty tomorrow morning. Fiordland and southern Westland, isolated showers today. Cloudy with areas of rain tomorrow. For the remaining areas of Te Waipoinamu, the South Island, mostly fine. Cloudy periods about Nelson and Marlborough and along the Canterbury and Otago coast. Valley fog lingering in central Otago and another frosty start tomorrow. And for Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, often cloudy, light showers. The time is coming up to 8 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Ngā mihi Evie, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The car's in reverse when it comes to Auckland Transport's controversial parking plans. Following public feedback, it's released the Room to Move strategy, which will drive decisions on how parking is managed in the supercity. It's ditched plans to charge for park and ride spots and is slowing down moves to repurpose off-street parking. Well, joining us now is Auckland Transport Head of Integrated Network Planning, Andrew McGill. Hi, Andrew.
Hi Lisa, good to be with you.
Let's start with the park and rides. So what's the plan with them?
Well, we heard a lot of feedback from Aucklanders on our proposal, and what we decided to do was listen to their suggestions, and we've changed our policy. And the new plan is to charge users who park and don't ride, which means that we're going to hopefully discourage people from doing that and free up spaces for commuters. And also what we heard from Aucklanders was they want to be able to travel and use the park and rides, not just in the early morning peak. So we're going to be introducing some spaces at each site, which will be reserved, and you can pre-book them to suit a time that you want to travel. And that way, hopefully, it won't just be something which is used just for the commuter peak, but is available for people at other times of the day as well.
How are you going to weed out the people who park up but don't get on public transport?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's really going to come down to a technology solution. So the way it will likely work, and we're still working through the details, and it's still going to be a little time away off, but basically we think we will be getting people to use their hop card to get through gates at the park and ride. And then it will simply be a matter of tagging on, as you usually do, to the bus or the train. And then the system will recognise that you've taken a public transport trip and therefore won't charge you.
What did Aucklanders tell you were their priorities in terms of parking and freeing up more road space for lanes?
Yeah, Aucklanders actually came through really strong and clear in saying that they do want to see our key roads flowing freely, and that we do need to prioritise movement on those key roads. So about 2/3 of Aucklanders, from what we heard, were in support of the idea of saying that having static 24/7 parking lanes on those key roads doesn't work, and we need to have more dynamic use of the space, and we do need to put in more transit lanes, more traffic lanes, more bus lanes, and get people moving. So that was a key priority that came through, and people also really like the idea of having local parking management plans that respond to the needs of their own situation. So that's something that we're going to be prioritising.
Andrew, on the issue of creating more space for lanes to keep traffic moving and therefore getting rid of some parks, will there be roads where you entirely get rid of parking on either side of the road, or are we just talking about a couple of car parks along roadways?
We're going to take a case-by-case basis, and we're not. I can't see any road where we would completely eliminate all parking necessarily. What we will do is look at the needs of that road, and those needs change at different times of the day. So it may need to be a bus lane between 7 and 9 a.m, and then it can be parking in the middle of the day, and then it goes back to being a bus lane in the evening. We can also look at where we need to put loading zones and mobility spaces, but we've got to recognise that these roads, they're a very small number of roads, it's about 16%, they move most Aucklanders. And we've got to make sure that they travel smoothly and freely. And so we're going to right-size the space and change it at different times of the day to suit those needs, but not forget about the important purpose and needs that some people have for parking in and along our high streets and town centres too. And that might mean putting in parking at some times of the day or putting it in side streets around the high street as well. And so we're going to look on a case-by-case basis and consult with the local boards, local businesses and the community as well.
So the city is divided up into different tiers, right?
Yes.
1, 2, 3. And where parking is most pressured, closest to the city, and it's a scarce resource, are you going to ramp up pricing and cut the amount of time people can sit on parks?
I think what we're going to do is what we really want to do is right-size the time. So at the moment, for instance, we have a standard loading zone time of 5 minutes. Now, we've heard from the freight and courier industry that 5 minutes doesn't work for them in a lot of places, particularly in the city centre. So it may be that we need to change that to being a 20 or 30-minute loading zone space. And
Okay,
I want to
so
do the
that's
same.
commercial. That's commercial interest,
Yeah.
Andrew. I'm talking about people who, bring their car into the city to work and they park outside on a parking meter. They take their chances of getting a ticket, right? Because the cost of the parking, it suits them to get the ticket rather than pay the full price for the parking. Are you going to ramp up meter charges, parking charges, for inner city car parks? Street parks?
So we are going to review parking pricing in each location, absolutely. We do have a limit, however, on what we can do with parking pricing because it's the government and not ourselves who set the parking fines. So we can only charge, obviously, to a certain amount, after which we don't want to see happen is a situation where it's cheaper to get the fine because that would be incentivising illegal behaviour and then the system falls apart. But we are definitely going to be looking at what we can do in terms of pricing to incentivise the right type of use of those spaces.
So you've gone exactly where I was going to go, Andrew. The central government sets what you can fine people, right? And
That's right.
Offshore in Australia, they have massive fines. In New South Wales, you can get a parking ticket of $129, and if you keep getting parking tickets, you can get demerits. Would it help you guys if central government ramped up those fines?
Look, it would help us. We've got to do the fines in a way which is fair, but I think that when you look at the fact that fines have not increased in New Zealand for a quarter of a century, there's something really wrong there. And we have been pushing the government to do something about this because we've got to make sure that people don't just park their car all day and then that space is not available for other people to use. It's just not fair on other members of the community, on your neighbours. And so we do want to see the government do something about this because it's been 25 years.
Thanks so much for your time. That's Andrew McGill, and he is from Auckland Transport. He's the head of integrated network planning. All about parking there. I'm sure you have some reckons on that. 2101 on text. At least 79 people have drowned after a migrant boat capsized off the coast of Greece. It is believed the boat was heading towards Italy after setting off from Libya. One dramatic image shows the vessel that's thought to have been carrying up to 400 people. More than 100 people have been rescued, but the weather has been hampering efforts. The mayor of the coastal town of Kalamata says the country is in shock.
We are shocked. We are shocked, like everyone in Greece. Obviously, after we were informed of this incident, all services were mobilised. The municipality of Kalamata, healthcare, etc. We have prepared. We are hearing that, unfortunately, the number of dead is increasing.
And it's one of Greece's biggest migrant tragedies. The government has declared 3 days of mourning. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, says he is horrified at the loss of so many lives. Here is his spokesperson, Stefan Dujarric.
Today we have yet another tragic illustration. I can tell you the Secretary General was horrified by the reports of a shipwreck that took place off the coast of Greece, claiming the lives of scores of women, men, and children. He stressed, as he said before, that every person searching for a better life needs dignity and safety. This is yet another example of the need of member states to come together and create orderly, safe pathways for people forced to flee and for comprehensive action to save lives at sea and reduce perilous journeys.
The BBC's Nick Beak is in Athens with this update.
We don't know the scale of this disaster tonight, but it's clear it is bad. More than 100 people have been rescued, but survivors are saying that up to 700 people, they believe, were on board this fishing boat. It set off, reportedly, from Libya and was heading to Italy. An image has emerged showing the vessel packed with people in the deepest part of the Mediterranean. No one, it would seem, had a life jacket on. The Greek authorities have said tonight that they went towards the vessel and that no one wanted help when they offered it. But that has been challenged by an organisation which provides an emergency phone number for people at sea. And it says, in fact, the authorities waited hours before they approached the vessel. And they also said that in terms of anyone refusing the offer of support, that was because of the so-called pushback policy that Greece pursues. In other words, pushing people out of Greek waters. That is a policy which Athens says doesn't exist. It repeatedly and strenuously has denied that it uses this sort of tactic. So where are we tonight? Well, the families of the dead are grieving. For hundreds more families, they face an unbearable weight to try and find out what has happened. And European leaders are talking once again about trying to find a solution to all of this. But the reality is, so far this year, more than 70,000 people have arrived in Europe, mainly in 4 different countries in the south of the continent. And with us going further into the summer, with the weather being good, the fear is that many more people will attempt this perilous crossing.
It is 18 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. The English city of Nottingham is mourning following the deadly stabbing of 3 people in the early hours of Tuesday morning local time. 2 were students, both aged 19, from the University of Nottingham, and the other a 65-year-old man. Hundreds of students have been joining the families of the victims in grief. The BBC's Navtej Johil reports from Nottingham.
Thousands united in grief. These students have come to express their shock and share their sadness at the loss of 2 of their own.
It's hard to find the words to express the shock and the grief felt across our institution at the senseless loss of 2 talented students who've had their bright futures brutally curtailed.
Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar were in their first year at the University of Nottingham. Their families, who should have been welcoming the 19-year-olds home for the summer, were instead here at a vigil as tributes were paid to the lives of their children.
I've lost my baby boy and I can't even comprehend how I'm going to deal with it. Myself and Emma and Charlie and with his family and friends. Well, I know Bobby will be super touched by everyone that's here.
The love that we have out here, I just wish we had it everywhere. So, look after each other.
Barnaby was a talented cricketer studying history. His family described their complete devastation, saying he was a beautiful, brilliant, bright young man with everything in life to look forward to. Grace was training to be a doctor. She too was a keen cricketer and played hockey for England under-16s and under-18s. To her family, she was an adored daughter and sister who was a wonderful and beautiful young lady. The attack's 3rd victim was 65-year-old Ian Coates, who worked in a local school. The head teacher said he was a much-loved colleague who always went the extra mile and will be greatly missed. His friend paid tribute to Mr. Coates.
No, he was a lovely gentleman, lovely gentleman. He's one of them people that will go out his way to help anyone, and I reckon that's probably what he was trying to do that morning as well. I've been here 3.5 years, and there's never a day we didn't see him with a smile. No matter what come his way, he was always smiling.
On a day of raw emotion, for now, there is little comfort to be found amid this tragedy.
North Korea is in a period of unprecedented isolation. The borders have been totally sealed for more than 3 years, originally a response to the pandemic in 2020, but they have never reopened. No one has been able to enter or leave, and for a time, supplies of food and medicine were stopped. It's thought that food insecurity has reached crisis point. For months, the BBC has been speaking with 3 people inside North Korea who put their lives at risk by doing so. Jean McKenzie reports.
Food supplies are so low, people have started dying.
This chilling testimony comes from inside North Korea.
Once, I didn't eat for 2 days. I only drank water.
Recently, people have been knocking on the door, asking for food, because they're so hungry.
Hearing from people inside this isolated country is extremely rare. But with fears the country is on the brink of a famine, we've been secretly communicating with people who live there. We're using actors and animations to illustrate their words and have changed their names to protect them.
In our village, 5 people are starved to death.
Chan Ho is a construction worker living near the Chinese border.
In one family, their wife was too ill to work, so her 2 children were surviving by begging. In the end, all 3 of them died. At first, I was afraid of dying from COVID, but then I began to worry about starving to death.
At the start of the pandemic, North Korea completely sealed its borders. These pictures, released by the regime, are all the world's been able to see. For years, no one has been allowed to enter the country. Authorities even stopped food and medicine from crossing the border. In South Korea, we began to get reports of chronic food shortages, and so we teamed up with an organisation here. Daily NK has sources inside the country who were able to get our questions to people. This is Ji-yoon, who lives in the North Korean capital Pyongyang, the wealthiest part of the country. She tells us even here, supplies are running dangerously low.
Once, I didn't eat for 2 days. I thought I was going to die in my sleep at night. My husband and I survived by thinking 10 more days. And then another 10 days, thinking if something happens, we might starve, but at least we'll feed our kids. There are lots of beggars now. If they're lying down, we check them and usually find they're dead. There are others who kill themselves at home or disappear into the mountains.
What these people are telling us evokes memories of the devastating famine of the late 1990s, known as the Arduous March, which killed as many as 3 million people. But the spectre of another famine has not stopped Kim Jong-un from funneling his limited finances into building nuclear weapons. The money he spent on missile tests last year would have been enough, according to some estimates, to ensure his entire population was properly fed.
The North Korean government and a representative from its embassy in London said in response to this report that the information collected is not entirely factual, as it was derived from fabricated testimonies from anti-DPRK forces. Thousands have been gathering in Italy to pay their respects to Silvio Berlusconi, whose state funeral is being held in Milan. A day of national mourning has been declared, the first time a former Prime Minister of Italy has been honoured this way. The BBC's Sofia Bezzia has the details.
A day of national mourning as thousands gathered to say a final farewell to Silvio Berlusconi, a man who dominated Italian society for almost half a century. Nearly 2,000 people attended his funeral inside Milan's Gothic cathedral. In the first row, his 5 children. And next to them, Marta Fascina, Berlusconi's girlfriend. She's 53 years his junior and more than 2 decades younger than Berlusconi's eldest daughter, Marina.
Silvio Berlusconi è stato certo un uomo politico.
During his sermon, the Archbishop of Milan said, "To be happy means to love parties and to enjoy life to the fullest." A sentence that perfectly encapsulates Berlusconi's flamboyant life. Political allies and rivals paid their respects, but very few world leaders showed up, an indication that Berlusconi has been a divisive figure until the end. As his coffin was taken outside the cathedral, an emotional crowd chanted, "Silvio will always be our president." Much like his life, Silvio Berlusconi's funeral was a spectacle, attended by political figures and a string of ex-girlfriends. Abroad, he might be remembered for his sex scandals, but here in Italy, he was a very influential figure who transformed the country's media, football and political landscape. But Berlusconi's party, Forza Italia, might not survive without him, which could be a challenge for the coalition government. So, after his death, the risk of political instability is looming.
And finally tonight, a story that is just bonkers. A Yankees broadcasting legend was bonked on the head by the baseball while doing live commentary for a game this week. As CNN's Jeannie Moose explains, even the commentary box isn't safe from foul balls.
It's one thing if fictional characters like Kramer or Sophia get bonked by a baseball, but there's nothing fictional about Yankee broadcasting legend John Sterling.
The Yankees win!
He still managed his signature line just moments after Red Sox third baseman Justin Turner smacked a foul ball that hit Sterling on the noggin.
3-2 swung on, a pop foul back here. Ow! Ow! Ow!
Yankee fans praised the 84-year-old. Bro is more durable than our players.
So I took one for the team. I am okay, just a glancing blow.
Posted one admirer, John Sterling is like a Timex.
Timex, it takes a licking and keeps on ticking.
Sterling got bonked by a ball that his broadcasting partner later took down to the Red Sox clubhouse. It came back, adorned with a Band-Aid that matched the one Sterling wore and an inscription from the batter.
And Justin Turner wrote to John, no matter where you sit at a ball game, you're never safe.
How nice is that?
I'm very impressed how he used no swear words.
Ow! Ow! Ow!
3 owls, and he's still not out.
Wow, that was a bit of a beating, and I'm impressed, no swear words either. Hey, tune in tomorrow, ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. on First Up. Former All Black Mark Ellis tells Nathan why he and his former teammates have taken a share in the Highlanders. Make sure you tune in for that. Someone's asking whether wallabies are yummy to eat. Don't know, sorry.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, Paul Mardier. I'm Evie Ashton. Hundreds of people are gathering at Wellington's Cathedral of St Paul for a service to remember the victims of the Loafers Lodge fire. 5 people died in the hostel blaze a month ago, and a man is facing murder charges. One of the 2 boys buried when a sand dune collapsed on Great Barrier Island at the weekend has had his life support turned off. The government and opposition have clashed after figures showed the country's economy has tipped into recession. And Hamilton's 60-year-old Founders Theatre will be demolished to make way for an inner-city park after attempts to save the building failed. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with Jessie Mulligan, new research into depression among first-time dads. The woman hoping to demystify Auckland's famous curry suburb of Sandringham with educational eating tours. I'll meet the 104-year-old who climbs the same Napier Hill each day. And Julie Busso with a recipe for the weekend, a stunningly delicious gingerbread loaf. It's on Afternoons from 1 p.m. tomorrow here on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with me, Evie Ashton, through till 7 tonight. It's time for Trending Now. On the detail tonight, a recent fire at a scrap metal yard in Auckland has put the spotlight on increasing hazards in the industry.
I'm Sharon Brett Kelly, and today on the detail I'm standing outside Sims Metal. That's the big scrap metal yard that was on fire a couple of weeks ago, and that fire burned for hours and hours and hours. I'm here because we were hoping to be able to go in and talk to somebody and have a little look around, but we but nobody's replied to our calls, and we couldn't get any other scrap metal yard to talk to us either. So I want to find out what goes in and what comes out of these scrap metal yards, and why it has actually become a much more complicated with the new technology that's around. So I'll be talking to someone from the industry, Karina Kirk. I'll also be talking to fire investigator Pete Gallagher about what it's like to go in and investigate the fires at these sites and why it can be so dangerous. While I was there, I saw a small explosion. It was over in seconds, and I'll talk more about that later. But just a reminder of what happened here on May 30th.
Well, emergency services say a scrap metal fire in South Auckland that's been burning for around 30 hours.
Trains were halted and Civil Defence urged thousands of people downwind of the industrial park in Favona to stay indoors because of the smoke.
There's another emergency alert. Time to get out, I think.
It's a smoke plume that's of concern, which is drifting into our communities.
It is the ninth fire at the yard.
Flashback to March 2018 as cars, bikes, scaffolding, roofing iron exploded into life.
These are heavy industrial sites, so there's a lot of very big machinery, a lot of heavy equipment, and the way in which the piles of scrap are arranged means that after the fire, there is a huge risk of some of the stuff sort of slipping and sliding and collapsing down.
That's Pete Gallagher, a manager of fire investigation and risk reduction at Fire and Emergency. He's talking about what it's like to go in after a big fire like this.
If you can imagine, it's a jumble of sticks that have been placed on the ground, and we're now trying to get in underneath and pull out some of those sticks to see exactly what's caused the fire to start. So like the pickup sticks that we played with as children, there's always the possibility that everything could come collapsing down on top of you. So they are really quite hazardous from an investigator's point of view.
So is it just like pile upon pile upon pile of metal?
Yeah, I guess in simple terms, that's exactly what it is. Although, the scrap metal industry is maturing as the world markets require cleaner scrap for resmelting, so that there's less use of the Earth's natural resources. And so now there's a greater emphasis on separating out metals when they arrive. So the scrap metal agent will go through and identify what's high quality aluminium, what's low quality aluminium. Same with steel, the non-ferrous metals, the coppers, the zincs, those sorts of things are all separated out because they all have different processes to go through. But they are essentially a big heavy pile of tangled metal.
What precautions are you taking?
Yeah, so it's a case of